Janelle Carter stood before the revolving glass doors of Summit National Bank and took a deep breath. The spring air slid quietly into her lungs, mingling with the gentle scent of roasted coffee wafting from the shop next door. That aroma always calmed her as if it drew a clear line. This is real life, not a financial report. Inside, sunlight filtered through the skylight and fell onto the marble floor, creating soft streaks of light that resembled brushstrokes. The space was quiet, almost luxuriously so designed to make people in expensive suits feel as though they belonged. Janelle looked down at herself, a fitted ash-gray blazer, crisp white shirt, shiny black heels. Everything neat, composed. She had even trimmed her nails short as though preparing for a job interview, though in reality she was here to do one basic thing: open a high-yield savings account. In her hand was a neatly clipped folder. Original ID. Quarterly performance bonus verification from Bright Path Systems. Utility bill as proof of address. And an envelope containing $3,000 in cash, her bonus for successfully coordinating 3 major tech projects in her first quarter. Jordan, her husband, the founder of Horizon Equity Partners, had taught her early on, having a job is fine, but letting your money sleep, that's not power. Make it work. That's how you take control. And today she was taking the first step toward that financial freedom. She stepped into the bank. Everything proceeded as expected until the first glance landed on her. Emily, the teller behind the counter, looked up. At first, her gaze was polite, but when she saw that the person walking toward her was a 30-year-old black woman carrying an envelope, that gaze slowed, evaluated, analyzed, calculated. The polite nod Emily gave at first morphed into a stiff smile, the kind of smile someone wears when they're not sure if they're meeting a customer or a problem. Behind Janelle, a white man in a tailored suit was being offered a cappuccino by another teller. Janelle placed the folder on the counter. "I'd like to open a high-yield savings account." Emily glanced at the envelope of cash. "You're planning to deposit all of this?" "Yes, and I'll be making monthly transfers from my payroll account." Janelle offered a faint smile, but Emily's eyes didn't return it. Instead, she said something that dropped the room temperature by 3 degrees. "We don't often see clients deposit funds like this, especially—" The sentence trailed off, but Janelle understood. She had heard its many variations all her life. "What kind of job do you have to earn this much? Is this your money? Do you have your husband's approval?" Janelle sat up straight, her hands resting gently on the cold countertop. She had entered banks countless times in her life, but never had she felt so scrutinized, as if any minor movement might cast her as untrustworthy. Emily, the young teller with blonde hair, gray eyes, and the polished appearance of someone straight from a recruitment ad, no longer smiled. She picked up the envelope with 2 fingers as if it were something not entirely clean. "This money. You said it's a bonus." "Yes. A quarterly performance bonus. My company issued it as part of payroll, and I withdrew it to separate it into a savings account as planned." Emily tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "And what field does your company work in?" "I'm a project manager at Bright Path Systems, a software firm in Midtown. The contract and verification letter are right there in the folder." She slid the papers across the counter, remaining composed. Emily picked them up but skimmed through quickly, as if the outcome had already been decided in her mind. "We have a policy to verify large cash deposits, especially those without a clear transaction history in our system." Janelle nodded. "I already confirmed this with customer service. I have all the necessary documentation, including a utility bill ID and an income verification letter. I can also provide my company's HR contact if necessary. Emily gave a faint nod, the kind reserved not for information, but for justifications. Behind them, a white woman in a pastel floral dress stepped up to the next counter. She smiled brightly, handed over a check, and said something cheerful. The teller burst out laughing, called her sweetheart, and handed her a glass of water. Janelle tilted her head slightly. The gap between the two counters was barely a meter, but the difference in treatment felt like they belonged to two separate worlds. She turned back just in time to see Emily whispering something to a male employee behind the counter. When she turned around again, the smile returned this time, like someone had flipped a switch. "Thank you for your patience," Emily said, still keeping the envelope close. "I'm going to call a manager to assist with this case. Your transaction is a bit unusual." Unusual? A word that sounds harmless. But in this bright white space under watchful eyes with both hands hovering over an envelope of cash, that word transformed a well-educated, gainfully employed woman with complete documentation into a question mark that needed monitoring. Janelle swallowed hard. Prejudice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the most polite and professional tone imaginable. Janelle gently twisted her wedding ring around her finger, a familiar habit whenever she needed to stay calm. It wasn't the air conditioning that chilled her anymore. It was the eyes around her. Something had shifted the moment Emily pressed the button to call the manager. No one said anything, but the atmosphere had changed from a customer making a transaction to someone under surveillance. She heard the steady sound of heels echoing on the marble floor. Then a woman appeared, tall, with brown hair neatly tied in a low-twist navy blue suit, hugging her frame like a uniform of authority. On her silver nameplate, Dana Maxwell, branch manager. Dana didn't smile. She didn't rush. She walked at the pace of someone who knew she was summoned to take control. "Miss Carter." Dana stopped at the counter. No handshake. No introduction. "I was told you have a large amount of cash to deposit." "Yes," Janelle replied. "I've prepared all the required documents. This is my quarterly performance bonus. The confirmation letter is here along with my ID and a utility bill." Janelle pushed the folder forward, keeping her tone composed. Dana didn't touch it. She didn't read. Her eyes stayed fixed on the envelope of cash as if it were a suspicious object in a crime drama. "Cash isn't the issue," Dana said. "It's the manner. We must protect the bank from legal risks and questionable activity." The word questionable landed like a stone, though it had been uttered as softly as a feather. "I've already verified everything. I called ahead and I checked the requirements on your website. I've complied with every regulation. I understand Dana cut in, still not picking up a single piece of paper. But this is a legal matter. The law requires us to flag transactions that exceed normal thresholds, especially when there's no existing account history." Janelle exhaled slowly, deeply. "You can call my company's HR department, or I can provide my W-2 if needed. I'm not resisting verification. I want to open a savings account." A faint nod from Dana, the kind of nod one gives not because they're listening, but because they're required to appear as though they are. And then Dana did something no one expected. She stepped to the side, approaching a small table by the wall. On it sat a red landline phone. Janelle watched her lift the receiver, saw her fingers press 3 digits, watched her straighten her back, her voice flattened to a calm, report-like tone. "This is Dana Maxwell, Willowgate Branch Summit National Bank. We have identified a suspicious transaction that may be related to money laundering. requesting rapid response unit and on-site support. That moment frozen in silence. No one in the lobby moved. Even the keyboard clicks had ceased. Emily didn't look up. The security guard began moving toward the counter, pretending to inspect the glass doors, but his eyes stayed locked on Janelle. She stood still. She was no longer just a customer holding $3,000 in cash. She was now a black woman having the police called on her in a bank in broad daylight. What do they think you are, a threat? Why? Because you don't look like someone carrying legal money. Janelle unlocked her phone with her fingerprint, opened her messages, typed quickly. They called the cops, refusing the deposit. I'm still calm, but they're preparing to detain me. She sent it to Jordan. No emojis, no exclamation marks. The quieter the humiliation, the sharper it cuts. The red phone was back on its cradle, but its echo still rang in Janelle's ears like an alarm only she could hear. Dana returned to the counter, maintaining no eye contact, no apology. She adjusted the buttons on her blazer as if she'd just completed a solemn civic duty. The police will be here in a few minutes, she announced, voice light as a weather report. We have procedures to follow in cases like this. We hope you'll cooperate. Cases like this. That phrase hung in the air, nameless, faceless, but fully loaded. Someone like you, skin like yours, cash like that. And the way you stood there, confident, unapologetic, that's what triggered the alarm. Janelle bit her lip, her throat dry as if the air had been sucked from the room. She once believed that police being called was for criminals, and she still holds that view today. People in the bank began watching more openly. A middle-aged man pretended to read a mortgage flyer, but never took his eyes off her. A young woman in business attire near the coffee machine whispered to a friend, "Something serious must have happened." Behind her, the security guard adjusted the strap on his radio. A click echoed the sound of a latch releasing, even though he hadn't moved closer. She turned slightly, seeing her reflection in the glass, still wearing Janelle Carter's charcoal blazer, a tidy bun, and unscuffed black heels. But to them, she had become a threat. Her phone vibrated. A message from Jordan. Saw it. On my way. You are not alone. She read it 3 times, not to understand, but to keep herself from unraveling. Because if a tear fell now, it would be labeled emotional. But if she stayed calm, she'd be deemed cold. For someone like her, every response came prejudged. A young employee with brown skin, a slender frame, and a ponytail walked past behind the counter. She glanced at Janelle, then looked away quickly. Janelle didn't blame her. She knew that feeling. She had once stood in that very spot, seeing wrong but unable to speak, because this system spares no one, even the silent. Then came the footsteps at the front door, firm, measured. 2 police officers entered, one a white male, the other a Latina female. The overhead lights gleamed on their badges, sparkling like a threat. The room froze. Dana rushed to greet them, urgency in every step, as though the bank's survival depended on handling the situation quickly. "Thank you for coming," Dana said, gesturing toward Janelle. "This is the customer who is involved in the suspicious transaction and refused to clarify and has been uncooperative. Potential money laundering activity." Janelle opened her mouth to protest, but closed it again. Not out of fear, but because she knew the law. And she knew she wouldn't play by their script. Officer Dawson, the white male, approached, hand resting lightly near his holstered gun. He nodded politely with a cold formality. "Ma'am, we need to verify a few things. Please come with us to a private area to talk." Private area. Another euphemism for interrogation. Janelle inhaled, then exhaled. She pulled out her phone, typed, "They're taking me now. Still calm. See you soon." Sent. Then looked up straight into the officer's eyes. "I'll go. But before I do, let me be clear. I have valid documents, a legal ID, a legitimate source of income, and I am the victim of systemic discrimination. I will cooperate, but I am also documenting every action taken here." Dawson paused just for a second, then nodded and gestured for her to walk ahead. She walked past Dana, didn't stop, but she looked directly at her, and for the first time, the bank manager lowered her gaze. Jordan Carter didn't run. He didn't need to run. He left the strategic meeting at Horizon Equity Partners the way one smothers a fire decisively without explanation. The remaining executives in the room, white men in crisp Armani suits, might have thought he was overreacting, but they hadn't received the message he had. "They're taking me. See you soon. I'm calm. Just 6 lines." But within them, Jordan heard the machinery of a broken system grinding into motion again, this time against his wife. In the car, he sat with Clara, the firm's legal counsel, and Victor Harris, the head of security. They reviewed the live feeds from the Willowgate branch of Summit National Bank. The surveillance footage was pulled through proprietary software that Jordan, as the bank's controlling shareholder, had remote access to. They saw everything. Emily pulls her hand back upon seeing Janelle's skin. Dana refused to touch the documents but lifted the red phone. The security guard was moving subtly closer than necessary. The looks from those around are silent but not innocent. "They didn't need weapons to strip her of dignity," Clara murmured. "Just a look of bias and one phone call." Jordan didn't respond. He stared at the footage, paused it at the exact moment Janelle was asked to step away from the counter, turned and looked into the security camera. That look wasn't one of a victim. It was the look of someone memorizing everything to recount later to those who would otherwise never be believed. 12 minutes later, a motorcade pulled into the glass circle drive in front of the bank, a Maybach, followed by a black Range Rover and a security vehicle. No sirens, no flashing lights. But when Jordan stepped out, silence rippled like an electrical field through the air. Dana saw him first. She straightened up, but her cheeks flushed red. Emily turned away. Curious customers suddenly pressed against the walls, as if they could sense a different force had entered the space, not the kind of power that came from a diamond-level card, but from someone walking and demanding answers. Jordan didn't speak at first. He walked straight to the counter and placed a thin metal card on the glass laser-etched Jordan A. Carter, CEO, Horizon Equity Partners, controlling shareholder, Summit National Bank. Beneath it was a certified copy of the bank's registry of ownership, red-stamped 31% of shares held personally in his name. He looked up at Dana. "I am the husband of the customer you just had the police called on. I demand my wife be released immediately. I demand all her transactions be restored to original standing, and I demand that you prepare an apology for what you chose to call a suspicion." Dana opened her mouth, barely managed. "I'm afraid," the Jordan raised his hand. A short motion. No words needed. Clara stepped forward, holding a tablet surveillance footage fast-forwarded. Emily's pause. Dana's call, the guard's movement, and Dana's refusal to read the documents. Frame by frame, Janelle remained composed. Victor added, "We also recorded the entire emergency phone conversation. No valid verification steps were taken. No system login, no customer ID scan, no documentation review. Jordan looked directly at Dana. I didn't come here to get angry. I came to prove that even those with power have limits. And today you cross that line. Not because I'm a shareholder, but because I'm a husband. And I will not allow this to happen to any other black woman. The back door opened. Janelle entered not in handcuffs, but visibly weary. She stopped when she saw Jordan, and for a brief, fragile moment between the walls of power and prejudice, she smiled. Slightly, but genuinely. Jordan walked to her without a word. He took her hand, not gripping, just resting his over hers as if to say, I saw. And I'm here. Janelle gently squeezed his hand as she stood in the center of the bank lobby facing dozens of stares, some curious, some judgmental, some ashamed. Dana Maxwell took a step back. Her eyes locked on the ownership certificate still on the counter, as if the phrase controlling shareholder had just become a Category 10 storm, tearing through the chair she sat in. Jordan turned his voice calm but loud enough to quiet the entire glass atrium. I want to speak to the chairman of the board immediately. Less than 10 minutes later, the east glass door opened. An older man walked in with silver hair and a navy-tailored suit composed yet not soft. His nameplate read, Richard Langford, Chairman, Summit National Bank. He approached Jordan and shook his hand, but his eyes swept the room like a seasoned investigator, noting the staff pressed against walls, customers feigning interest in their phones, and Janelle standing like a crack in the pristine marble floor. Jordan Richards said in a low voice, I got the call. What's going on at our branch? Jordan didn't answer. He nodded toward Clara. Clara played the footage directly on the tablet, holding it in Dana's face. No cuts, no voiceovers, just a clean timeline. A black woman walks into a bank with complete documentation. A teller grows suspicious without cause. A manager calls the police before verifying anything. That woman happens to be the largest shareholder's wife. Richard fell silent for several seconds, then turned to Dana. Ms. Maxwell, do you have anything to say? His voice didn't need to rise. The silence of the lobby had already served as a reprimand. Dana swallowed hard. Her lips pressed tightly. I was just following financial safety protocols. The transaction was unusual. The behavior atypical. Atypical, Richard repeated, his eyes steel for the first time. How do you define atypical, Maxwell? Dana faltered. She glanced at Janelle, then quickly looked away. Richard didn't wait. He pulled out his phone and called the senior HR director directly. Begin immediate suspension proceedings for Dana Maxwell. Effective now, and send a notice to the entire system from this moment on. All flagged transactions must be based on evidence, not personal instinct. In that instant, a soundless wave swept through the room. Employees looked at each other. Some bowed their heads. Some stayed stone-faced. But all understood something had shifted, and it wouldn't return to what it was. Jordan turned to Janelle, speaking softly. People are watching. Do you want to say anything? Janelle took a step forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't point fingers. She stood this woman who'd just survived a suspicious transaction and looked directly at the faces of those who doubted her without cause. I came here to deposit money, not to be interrogated like a criminal. I don't need special treatment, but I deserve to be treated like a human being. And if I, with my documentation, my employment, and a husband who owns part of this bank, am treated this way, then what happens to other black women who don't have a name or shares or a voice? No one answered. But their silence was the answer. Richard bowed his head to her, a rare gesture. "Ms. Carter, on behalf of the bank, I apologize. And I also know an apology is not enough." Janelle gave a slight nod. "I don't need an apology. I need this system to change." The next morning, while coffee cups on the boardroom table were still warm, the official website of Summit National Bank unexpectedly published an urgent announcement. "We offer our deepest apologies for the incident that occurred at the Willowgate branch involving customer Janelle Carter. The bank is committed to a comprehensive review of our service procedures and transaction monitoring systems. It will immediately launch an internal reform initiative to ensure that every customer, regardless of race, gender, or status, is treated with equal dignity." On social media, hashtags began to spread. Hashtag she just wanted to save. Hashtag banking while black. Hash summit must change. Meanwhile, in internal bank employee groups, one word was typed more than ever before: ashamed. Janelle didn't respond to the media. She didn't go on podcasts. She didn't accept interviews from local news stations. She did only one thing. She sat in the small living room of their midtown duplex next to Jordan and wrote a proposal titled the Financial Access Equity Initiative. "I don't want this to be wrapped up in a PR statement," she said, looking up at Jordan. "I want people to change how they treat black women the moment we walk through the door. Not because we have rich husbands, not because we have degrees, but simply because we deserve it." Jordan nodded. "And this time the system is going to listen." 3 days later, at the bank's executive board meeting, Chairman Richard Langford opened with a rare declaration. "We have witnessed the truth in the video, in silence, in our behavior. I will not defend a system that allows a woman to be treated like a stranger in the very place she entrusts with her assets." The executive board approved the reform proposal developed by Janelle and her advisory team with 5 key pillars. 1. Mandatory training on implicit racial bias, not through online modules, but in-person sessions led by sociologists and lived experience experts. 2. Standardized verification procedures for large transactions requiring objective proof, not subjective intuition. 3. Creation of an equity access unit to address complaints involving bias related to race, gender, or class. 4. This is My Bank Media campaign encouraging minority customers to speak up about their experiences breaking the silence. 5. The Janelle Carter Scholarship Fund supports students of color studying finance with a promise to nurture both skill and character. Janelle wasn't present at the public announcement. She appeared later that afternoon at a community talk held at the East Willow Cultural Center, a place where she had once volunteered as a student. There were no cameras behind her, no flashes of light. Just a warm room, a few rows of plastic chairs, a group of older women, and a handful of college students wide-eyed as she stepped onto a makeshift plywood stage. She told the whole story, step by step, with no embellishments. "I brought documents. I got legal money. And I got the confidence I'd spent a lifetime building. But the only thing they saw was the color of my skin. And worse than that, the silence of those who saw it and turned away." An older woman stood up holding a cane, eyes glistening. "I've banked with them for over 20 years, and I always tried to be gentle pleasant, so they wouldn't be uncomfortable with me. But now I see I wasn't wrong. They were." A student in the back raised her hand. "If this could happen to you with all your papers with a husband like that, How can we ever feel safe putting our money anywhere? Janelle smiled, but it was a smile with weight. Because now you know if they do wrong, we don't have to bow our heads. We stand up together and make them fix it. 4 weeks after Janelle was reported to the police for trying to open a savings account, something strange began to happen across Summit National Bank branches. Nods became slower, eyes made direct contact, and employees began to listen. At the East Riverside branch, a new staff member named Luis Morales, formerly a teller at a small Texas bank, stood up during a training session on implicit bias and professional blind spots. I used to think if a customer brings in a lot of cash, something shady is going on. I didn't realize I only thought that when they didn't look like me. At the back of the room, an older employee with graying hair, drumming his fingers by habit, looked up. For the first time, he didn't push back. He said quietly, "Same here. We all do it. The difference is..." Today, someone dared to say it out loud. Not everyone agreed. Some within the system still thought Janelle was overreacting, that the police didn't handcuff her, that everyone has to follow protocol. However, those voices grew quieter because silence was no longer the comfortable option it once was. Even Emily the teller, who had first doubted Janelle at the counter, didn't remain silent. By the 6th week, during an internal reflection session at the Willowgate branch, Emily stepped to the podium. Her voice trembled. I said nothing when things began to spiral. I let fear of blame outweigh my conscience. I didn't lose my job, but I lost the way I saw myself. And now I'm trying to earn that back piece by piece. In the soft amber light of the meeting room, no one clapped. No one needed to. Because honest admission doesn't need praise, it needs to be received. The bank's reform committee reported discrimination-related complaints dropped by 70% in just 2 months. New customers from minority communities increased by 25%, especially women of color under 35. An internal survey found 81% of employees felt they had recognized biases they had never named before. 67% of customers felt more heard than before. At Horizon Equity Partners, where Janelle Carter oversaw billions each year, a special meeting was held. Not about investment, not about returns, but about one single question from Janelle. Can we scale this initiative not just for Summit Bank, but for the entire financial industry? She placed a document on the table, a plan to expand the Financial Access Equity Initiative into a nationwide public-private coalition with 3 pillars. 1. Practical training, not just discussions about bias, but lived experience storytelling in real-world settings, so financial professionals see instead of hear. 2. Community oversight. Each branch would have an equity ally responsible for receiving feedback and connecting customers to senior leadership as needed. 3. Scholarships and financial internships for students of color. So the next generation enters finance not just with skills, but with inherent power. Jordan didn't hesitate. He nodded, locking eyes with his wife. We've lit a flame in one place. Now it's time to carry that light into darker corners. 1 month later at Willow Creek Community College, where Janelle had once studied finance on a partial scholarship, she returned. This time, I was the keynote speaker for a summit titled Banking Without Bias. Before her sat 120 students, black, brown, white, Asian, all with eyes full of the kind of attention she once wished for on the day someone asked her, "Are you sure that money's yours?" I used to think I had to prove my worth through resumes, titles, and degrees, she said. But that day at the bank, I realized the only thing I needed to prove was that I wouldn't stay silent. Because if I stay silent, they'll just do it again to someone else. On a crisp Sunday morning, Janelle Carter stood in the courtyard of the Willow Park Community Finance Center, where the first-ever financial services and education fair was being held specifically for communities that had been historically excluded from the banking system. Behind her on a modest wooden stage was a large printed banner, "Financial Rights for Everyone. Qui Entitling cha TTC." Surrounding her were small booths, a free legal advice table for people who had previously been denied bank accounts, a corner for youth applying for banking scholarships, and a long row of tables where banks once silent were now actively reaching out to the community. Janelle wore a simple white blouse, her hair neatly tied back, standing beside Jordan, quiet as always, but his gaze followed her like a compass guiding true north. In her hand was the first batch of applications for the scholarship, bearing her name, dedicated to students of color who had been denied banking access simply for lacking credit history. She stepped up to the stage. The microphone emitted a soft screech, then fell silent. No music, no props. Just a black woman who was once flagged as a money laundering risk for trying to deposit $3,000 legally, now standing before a community that had never been invited through the glass doors of a bank. I used to think I was lucky. I had a college degree, a stable job, a brilliant husband. But that day when they looked at me like a criminal, I realized none of that protected me. When my skin color walked in before my credentials, a hush swept over the crowd. Elderly hands lowered pens. Children looked up from folding chairs. I know some people stayed silent, not because they didn't hurt, but because they thought they were alone. But today, looking around, I know we are not alone. We are not wrong just because we don't look like them. And today, I want to open a door so that anyone who walks in after me will never have to bow their head. She paused one heartbeat. Then came the thunderous applause, not out of protocol, but from the heart. It wasn't just for her. It was for every soul who'd once clenched their jaw and walked away from a teller's desk in silence. In the crowd, Mrs. Louise, 67. A widow who had once been denied a loan for lacking a guarantor, wept as she signed to open a new account at the Summit Reconnect booth. A new initiative launched by the very bank that had once humiliated Janelle. I've been afraid all my life, afraid to ask, afraid to be denied and scared to be humiliated. But she, that girl, stood there, unafraid. So today I will stand tall too. At the far end of the courtyard, Malik, a senior accounting student who had been denied a credit card for lacking a credible co-signer, held up an internship offer signed by the Summit Bank Executive Board. He turned to a friend and grinned. First time I've felt like I belong in this field without having to change who I am. Even those who stayed silent on the day it all happened, like the former security guard from the Willowgate branch, showed up. He stood at a distance, said nothing, but his eyes were red. Janelle walked toward him. No blame, no bitterness. She said, "You can still do what's right starting today." He nodded, an unspoken promise with more weight than any excuse. Before the fair ended, organizers made a surprise announcement. We've received expanded funding from 3 regional banks and a private equity fund. This initiative will launch in 6 more cities next year. Janelle turned to Jordan. He just smiled and shrugged. Told you I'd use my influence at the right time. She smiled back, eyes shining not because of the money, but because what she created no longer belonged to her. It belonged to everyone. 3 months after being asked to explain a bonus deposit at a bank where her husband was a stakeholder, Janelle now stood before a crowd not of skeptics, but of the grateful. The Southeast Regional Financial Fair held at the Willow Creek Exhibition Center drew over 4,000 attendees in 2 days. The vast space once reserved for entrepreneur galas and investor summits was now filled with booths bearing new slogans. Finance is a right, not a privilege. We don't need apologies. We need recognition. Janelle, in an ivory dress, took the main stage framed by banners showing everyday people, a single mother, a newly naturalized immigrant, and a young black graduate, all holding hands, standing in a bank with the posture of belonging. She held no notes, no speech. She just spoke. I used to think I was an exception. A 30-year-old black woman with degrees, a managerial role, and a stable family. But that day I realized it was because I had all those things that I scared them. Because I walked into a space where they weren't used to seeing someone like me managing money, depositing money, asking permission from no one. The lights caught her eyes, but Janelle didn't flinch. She looked straight into the crowd at those who had once been asked, "Where's this money from? What do you do for a living? Do you have your husband's confirmation?" They called me an exceptional case. But I say no. I'm the beginning of what should be normal. Normal is a black person entering a bank and being welcomed, not questioned. Normal is a woman depositing money without being asked, "Did you earn this?" Normal is not needing anyone to validate your worth but yourself. In the front row, the newly appointed chairwoman of Summit National Bank, an Asian-American woman named Teresa Huang, bowed her head deeply. Not in shame, but in respect. Since the incident, the bank has changed. 100% of frontline staff across all branches had completed hands-on bias training. A system of equity advocates similar to ombudspersons had been implemented in 72 central locations. Discrimination complaints dropped by 86%. And most importantly, trust returned. Janelle refused to be called a victim. Instead, she became a guide. Each month, she visited a different branch, not to audit, but to talk. No press, no cameras. Just her and the bankers, sharing coffee, replaying the phrases they hadn't realized they used. We're just following protocol. It's internal policy. Can you wait for the manager to verify? One day, a young male employee, white, approximately 23 years old, approached her after a session at the North Side branch. He hesitated. "I once denied a customer, just because I felt uncomfortable hearing them speak Spanish. I'm not proud, but thanks to you, I now know that feeling isn't a reason." Janelle smiled, gently, but sincerely. You dared to name it. That means you're already walking in the right direction. That evening at the fair's closing ceremony, Jordan stepped onto the stage, not to introduce Janelle as his wife, but as a partner who had helped him pivot an entire ship many thought immovable. He looked at her filled with pride. Janelle did what this industry has long avoided. She made the bank, the very seat of financial power, look at itself. And more than that, she did something even greater. She turned a personal injustice into collective justice. That night, long after the crowd had left, Janelle stood alone on the empty stage, lights dimmed. She looked at the vacant chairs, imagining the faces of people who once sat there, no longer seeing the bank as a place to fear. She whispered, "No one enters a place just to be accepted. They walk in to know." They were never in the wrong place to begin with. And then she stepped down, no longer the woman detained at the teller's desk, but the one who opened a path where no path had existed. When they call you an exception, don't fear. You might be the reason that exception becomes someone else's norm.